Our daily Bible reading and devotion for April 6th. Our reading today comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, verses 18 through 36. Now it happened that as he was praying alone, the disciples were with him, and he asked them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" And they answered, "John the Baptist, but others say Elijah, and others that one of the prophets of old has risen." Then he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered, "The Christ of God." And he strictly charged and commanded them to tell this to no one, saying, "The Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised." And he said to all, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up the cross daily and follow me. For whoever will save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. But I tell you truly, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God." Now about 8 days after these sayings, he took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, 2 men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep. But when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. And as the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. As he was saying these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my Son, my chosen one. Listen to him." And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent and told no one in those days anything of what they had seen. Within the above passage comes a part of doctrine that should not be overlooked. It is that of the kingdom of God and its implications. This is a difficult subject for some to grasp, yet the Bible is not silent on this. In fact, the Bible is very clear as to what the kingdom of God is, where it is, and when it began. There are some things that we can ascertain from this verse. First, the kingdom of God was not in place when this verse was written. We can estimate at this point it was but a short time, maybe weeks, maybe months before Jesus would be crucified. The date generally given is 30 AD. That some, not all, would see this kingdom established is plain from the passage. Judas Iscariot would hang himself just before Jesus' death. It is accepted by most scholars that the Apostle John was the last living disciple of Jesus, and that he passed somewhere in the late 1st century or early 2nd century. So the kingdom of God was established between 30 AD and the close of the 1st century. A 70-year gap to stretch, to choose from. Surely something as important as the establishment of the kingdom of God would be more clearly established, don't you think? Let's look further into this and see if we can point to a more specific time. Paul says in Colossians 1:13, "He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son." Paul says he has, past tense. So around 60 AD, when this epistle was written, it had already occurred. The parallel passage of Luke's account can be found in Matthew 16 and Mark 8. In Matthew 16, we find that Jesus asked his disciples who people say that he is. Peter's reply will be that which will establish much to identify further the kingdom. Simon Peter answered in Matthew 16:16, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus replies to this and tells us even more about the kingdom. "I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Matthew 16:18 through 19. Jesus identifies the kingdom and the church as being that which he would build upon that confession and give the keys to Peter for entrance into it. Mark's gospel tells us how that kingdom would come, until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power. Mark 9, verse 1. This power would be displayed shortly after Jesus ascended to heaven, and the disciples waited in Jerusalem for instructions. Acts chapter 1. Soon they would see the fulfillment of this prophecy. In Acts chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, we find, when the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place, and suddenly there came from heaven a noise like a violent rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them tongues as of fire distributing themselves, and they rested on each one of them. So we see that the kingdom did come in the apostles' lifetime. In fact, it was on the day of Pentecost, AD 30, that the kingdom was established. We see that the church and the kingdom are one and the same. Someday, Christ will meet the kingdom in the air and take her home to heaven. We find in Acts chapter 1 and verse 11, they also said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into the sky? This Jesus, who was taken up from you into heaven, will come in just the same way as you have watched him go into heaven." And Jesus wrote in John chapter 14 and verse 3, "If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also." Question of the day: have you considered what an honor it is to be a citizen of the greatest kingdom that can ever be? And a thought to meditate on this day: someday the present kingdom will be presented to the Father before the throne of heaven. All shall be revealed. It would do us well to be prepared for that day. And those are our devotional thoughts for April 6th.